Hello and welcome back to Historical Accounts, and today we are talking about the Women's Air Force Service Pilots Program, also known as WASP. This unit played a critical role during World War II, ferrying as many as 50% of all aircraft produced in the United States during World War II. During a time when pilots were needed in the Pacific and European theaters, these women stepped up into a role that was not readily available for them and faced various persecutions because of their gender. And while the WASP units were not in service for very long, they had a lasting impact on aviation. To understand how the WASP program began, we got to look at this man, General Henry H. Arnold, also known as HAP. I have previously mentioned that General Arnold was an aviation pioneer and was crucial into the United States beginning its jet development program, but he was also a crucial part of the WASP program beginning. Now, General Arnold was not some type of women's rights advocate or anything like that. However, he had heard that the British were using women to fill in the roles for moving aircraft across the country, and he had been convinced that maybe the United States could have a similar program. After finally getting congressional approval in September of 1942, he had two units formed. The first of these, to be led by Nancy Harkness Love, was known as the Women's Auxiliary Ferry Squadron, or WAFS. Love was to take this group of women who were already trained and qualified pilots and train them to transport aircraft from factories to training bases in the United States. The other group was to be led by Jackie Cochran, and this one was known as the Women's Flying Training Detachment, and this was to develop an intensive training program to increase the number of women who could fly for the ferrying division. On August 5, 1943, the WAFs and the WFTD were merged into a single unit for all women pilots that would not only oversee qualifications in every type of aircraft in service and future aircraft that would be serviced, but would also allow them to train new pilots, and this unit would be known as the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP. While Love immediately put qualified pilots to work, Cochran had to train a new batch of pilots, or at least train them in the Army way. Initially, Cochran trained her pilots at the Houston Municipal Airport, now known as William P. Hobby Airport. But even before the group officially became known as the WASP, it was determined that a new multi-purpose, multi-training facility was needed for these women. Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas was chosen to take on this role, becoming an almost entirely all-female installation with the exception of a few male instructors and other officers. The Army Air Force would designate this as the 318th Army Air Force's Flying Training Detachment, 31st Flying Training Wing. At this facility, women would be trained to fly every type of aircraft in the U.S. inventory, from fighters to bombers. Because of this, they were trained in almost the exact same as their male counterparts. The only thing they were not trained to do was combat aerobatics, as it was not seen as necessary, as they would not be seeing combat roles. From their inception in September of 1942 to the end of the program in 1944, the WASP had trained over 1,000 female pilots and ferried over 50% of combat aircraft within the United States. They flew between 126 bases across the United States. They also towed targets for gunnery training and served as instrument instructors for the Eastern Flying Training Command. Sadly, over the course of this, they did lose 38 pilots, 11 in training incidents, and 27 during missions. Now, sadly, even though they were contributing majorly to the war effort, they were still part of a civilian group and were not seen as part of the military, so those who died were not given any sort of military funeral. Now, both Cochran and Love had hoped that all of their efforts and the efforts of these women would prove to the military that women had a role in it and that they would eventually be part of the Army Air Force. And in fact, General Arnold had plans to commission these women into the Army Air Force as second lieutenants. However, during the course of this, he encountered great opposition from Congress and the media, where there ended up being high-profile hearings from the House Committee on Military Affairs questioning the need for these women pilots. Sadly, they were a victim of their own success. Their efforts to allow male pilots to be sent to the European and Pacific theaters meant that the German Luftwaffe would eventually be conquered, and the need for as many male pilots would be reduced. As a result of this, Congress rejected the WASP militarization bill on June 21, 1944. The last WASP training class would graduate December 7th, 1944, and the WASP program itself would end on December 20th. That final graduation, General Arnold told them that their contribution to the war effort would not be forgotten. However, sadly, it would be forgotten by the next year. Their records were actually rendered as classified material and sealed away from the public. In fact, it would not be until the 1970s, when the United States Air Force announced that it would begin accepting women pilots, that the WASPs actually rose up to have their service acknowledged. And on November 23, 1977, President Carter signed Public Law 95-202, Title IV, which granted former WASP veteran status with limited benefits. This was followed by, in 1979, the WASP receiving their discharge certificates. In 1984, they received the World War II Victory Medals, and those who had served for a year or more were also awarded the American Theater Campaign Medal. And in 2010, the surviving WASPs were given the Congressional Gold Medal. Now, if you would like to learn more about this history of these women and their amazing effort to the United States during World War II, I recommend you take a trip out to Sweetwater, Texas, where you can actually go to Avenger Field and visit the National WASP World War II Museum. The museum has a great collection of not only artifacts, but detailed history of the role these women played during the Second World War. But there you have it, a look at the really short-lived program known as the WASPs and its predecessors and their role during World War II. It cannot be understated just how valuable these women were to the war effort. Their contributions to moving logistics, their contributions in helping training were valuable in the United States war effort. And sadly, they were a victim of their success. They were so good at their job that they freed up the resources needed for the war effort, and they ended up no longer being needed. Now, they were done wrong, being completely ignored and having their records sealed, but I am happy to see that their legacy has come to light and that future generations will learn about them.